Hi, everybody. Masechet Pesachim, Kaf Daled 24. Very nice stuff. We are trying to figure out a source for prohibiting a benefit of chametz. That's how we got this all off. The Mishnah said that, so we know that chametz you cannot benefit from, you can't sell it, you can't use it, but we don't have a source for this. So far we've been using one strategy, which is to look at grammar and the words, lo ye'achel, other prohibitions say lo tochelu and things like that. And so we went through the concordance and tried to figure out, does this mean only eating in some forms? Does it mean also not getting benefit from it? And we found a couple of different strategies. Maybe all the verbs mean that, maybe only the passive verb, and we worked through all those examples. But today we're going to use a completely different strategy. Right now we're following a student of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. And he has rejected all those strategies. He said, no, eating, lo yachel, just means eating in all its forms. And don't bring me nevela and terefa, because those, it says that you can give it to a goy, you can give it to a dog. I need those pisukim for the context themselves to tell me how to give it to the stranger and to the non-Jew. And I need to tell me something about the terefa itself. And so the chulin, shenishchat ba'azara. So I need all those for their context. I can't learn it from there. So instead, we're going to be introduced today to a new strategy. It's called im eno inyan. We're going to look at pisukim from different contexts and transport them to this context. The way it works, I'll give you an analogy. Some years ago, there was a crazy archaeologist named Wendell Jones. He was looking for the lost ark. He died a few years ago and he never found it, needless to say. But what was his strategy? He found in one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Copper Scroll, that it mentioned a wadi that could not be identified. And he looked at a map and saw a little stream that had no name. So he said, look, a name without a wadi and a wadi without a name, they must be the same thing. And so he wanted to try to go and dig there. Okay, so that's not a very good strategy for talking about names of little streams. But if you're thinking about a closed system, for example, let's say you have, the supers have those rings with 100 keys on it. I don't know how they know which one's which. And you have a building with 100 doors, and you know there's one key for every door. Most of them are labeled, but some of them are not labeled or mislabeled. Well, in that case, if you have just one door then that doesn't have a key and one key that is not matched up to a door, then you can presume that it is the same in that closed system. So too, the Talmud Bavli assumes a one-to-one relationship between laws and sources. We have laws from the Torah Sheba'al Peh. They're mentioned in the Mishnah. It just says, this is a law. Shor haniskal, an ox that gores has to be killed, and you can't get benefit. We know the law, but we don't have a source. And so then when we go through the Pisukim and we find a Pasuk that's not needed for itself, so now we have a source without a law. So when you have that, you can mash them up. And even though that law is in a different place altogether, a different context, we're kind of transporting it over to talk about this law. All right, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to see four different strategies. First, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, learning it from Vayikra Vav, from an inedible offering. Then Rabbi Yonatan from leftover meat. Then Abaye is going to go back to A. And then Rav Papa is going to learn it from impure meat. Each of the first two will have questions on them, and Rav Papa will have no questions. That will be successful. All right, let's jump right in and see how we get there. So we ask, having rejected all the other methodology, minayin, how do you know that, especially these two examples, chametz and the killer ox, how do we know that these two are asur behana'ah? Dichtiv, kol chatat asher yuva midamah, she'en tomad lomar ba'esh tisaref, uma tomad lomar ba'esh tisaref. Also got the Pesukim so we can understand what this is talking about. So we have in Vayikra Vav is talking about chatat offerings, and it says kol chatat asher yuva midama el ohel moed lechaper b'kodesh lo te'achel ba'esh tisaref. There are two kinds of chatat. Some are edible, some are inedible. The lower level ones, they're sprinkled in the mizbeach outside, the big mizbeach, and those the kohanim eat within the precincts of the Bet HaMikdash. But there are a few higher level chatat offerings, like the chatat of Yom Kippur. Those are sprinkled on the Mizbach HaZahav inside the sanctuary. And those, if it's brought, if that blood is brought in Ohel Moed, then they cannot be in Lo Te'achel Ba'esh Yisaref. The whole thing has to be burnt. Okay, so that's a special status of these korbanot. Now you notice this pasuk says Lo Te'achel Ba'esh Yisaref. Do not eat it, burn it with fire. That's already a redundancy. If you're going to burn it with fire, then isn't that obvious that you're not allowed to eat it? Okay. In fact, we're going to bring 3 pasukim. They all have this in common. So that's the common theme. The next one we're going to bring says Saraftat hanotar ba'esh lo yachel. Burn it, don't eat it. The last one we're going to bring lo yachel ba'esh yisaref. Don't eat it, burn it. Okay. So that's the key thing we're looking for here, is that redundancy. But anyway, right now we're not looking at that redundancy. It's going to come up in C. We're looking at a different source for the redundancy. Over here it says that this sin offering, which was sprinkled in the Ohel Moed, has to be burnt, and you can't eat it. Now, the fact that it has to be burnt, I can derive this from a story that comes up later in Vayikra. Very famous story. When Aharon is performing the chatat offering, this is on the day of the inauguration of the Mishkan. So the Siyed HaChatat, Moshe is looking for it. He's checking it out. Moshe is like the mashgiach on that day to make sure all the kohanim are doing everything correctly, and he finds that this chatat soraf, behold, it was burnt. Now, what's wrong with the fact that it was burnt? So let's see. Moshe gets angry at Eleazar and Ithamar, bnei Aharon, hanotarim. The other 2 sons had already died. And so Moshe gets angry. Why doesn't he get angry at Aharon? Rabbi Shama explains that actually he was angry at Aharon, but he only rebuked the sons as to be more indirect out of honor for Aharon. And he tells them, why didn't you eat the chatat in the sanctuary? It's Kodesh Kadashim, so you have to eat it here, not outside. But it was given to you, and by eating it, by consuming it, that's how you make its atonement efficacious. And here's the key explanation: the blood of this chatat was not brought into the Kodesh, inside in the Hechal, into the inner Mizbeach. So since it was not brought inside, therefore, you could have and you should have eaten it. You only are supposed to burn that chatat offering which is sprinkled inside the betem, inside the hechal, and not if it was not. So there you go. From this story, we can learn that the only reason they were supposed to eat is because the blood was not sprinkled inside, right? But Moshe comes and says, hey, the blood was not sprinkled inside in this case, therefore you should not have burnt it, right? So from the opposite, we can learn that if it was sprinkled inside, then you should have burnt it. So there you go. We have a source from this story that in that blood of that sin offerings that are offered on the Mizbeach inside must be burnt. So therefore, this pasuk in Vayikra is extraneous. Okay, we might say that this is the law, and then there's a story about the law. But really, we could learn the law from the story itself. Of course, the answer here to the story is, I don't want to leave it on a cliffhanger. Aharon says, on this day when I'm in mourning after I lost my 2 sons, how can I partake of this meat, which would be a joyous thing? And Moshe says, you know what, you're right. Okay, so that's the question. Why do we need this? Why do we need to say that this here in Perek Vav that this is burnt when I can already tell it from the story? And so the answer is missed something. So here's what we say: since this ba'esh tisaref is not needed for its context, the current context regarding sin offering, because I already know that. Therefore, use that phrase, ba'esh tisaref, for other prohibitions, that those prohibitions also you cannot benefit from. Now, how would I know which prohibitions? There's lots of prohibitions in the Torah. The answer is the ones that you know from the Mishnah, from Torah Sheba'al Peh. You know that they are prohibited from a benefit, but you don't know where it's from. So now you can match them up. And so that's what we do. Now, over here it said that they cannot be eaten; they must be burnt. So we kind of already know it can't be eaten. That's directly what that pasuk says. But we already know that chametz you cannot eat, and shor niskal you cannot eat. That's what the pasukim say themselves. So if it's not talking about eating, teneu inyan leisur hana'ah, that means you can't derive benefit from it. Now, if you're really learning it as a one-to-one from this, over here it says you should burn it. So does that mean you have to burn shor haniskal? You do burn chametz, happens to be, but that's said specifically by chametz, right? So if we're really going to learn this and transfer the entire pasuk word for word, then it might think you have to burn other isurei hana'ah. But we say no. So as all things that are prohibited, also you have to burn, and that we should derive that. Amar kera bakodesh ba'esh tisaref. Bakodesh bisrefa ben kol isurim shebatorah bisrefa. And this pasuk, since it linked kodesh to serefa, only kodesh, only sacrificial things that you can't use have to be burnt, and not other things. So it's a partial transfer, right? We have these extra words that you should burn this type of sin offering. We don't need to know it because we already know from somewhere else. And as we transfer it over, we don't need to transfer it to tell us that it can't eat those isurim, because it says explicitly regarding chametz and shor haniskal. Instead, we learn that it cannot benefit from it, but we're not transferring over the specific detail that has to be burnt. Okay, so that's number one. However, we're going to reject this pasuk. Are you really going to tell me that this bakodesh ba'esh tisaref is coming to teach me these isurei hana'ah? Actually, I need these words for the current context of sin offering. As Rabbi Shimon taught, the Tanya Rabbi Shimon omer, bakodesh ba'esh tisaref, limed al hatat shesh tzorfin otah bakodesh, ve'en li ela zo bilbad, פסולי קודשי קודשים, ומורה קודשים קלים מניין, תלמוד לומר, וכל בקודש באש תשרף. Okay, it has to teach me that this chatat offering, or sin offering, that you have to burn, I know you have to burn it, but where do you have to burn it? Oh, you have to burn it in the kodesh. You have to burn it on the mizbeach in the kodesh, not burning it outside. And not only this, but also other kodshei kodashim, the highest level, other chataot and other korbanot, special korbanot that become pasul because they're pigul, whatever, or kadashim kalim, lower level sacrifices that could be eaten outside of the Bet HaMikdash in the precincts of Jerusalem, but their insides have to go on the mizbeach. If those innards, the parts that go on the mizbeach, become pasul, then they also have to be burnt in the Bet HaMikdash, in the Kodesh. And so Rabbi Shimon derived from these extra words here. Let's see, it says also vechol, vechol chatat, this vechol, and then skipping over to bakodesh, ba'esh tisaref. So we put these words together, link them. Anything that is kodesh, that becomes inedible, becomes pasul, has to bakodesh ba'esh tisaref. They have to be burnt in the kodesh. Kodesh is a description of where you burn them. And so therefore, these words, ba'esh tisaref, we actually need them for the current context. They're not extra, right? We actually have a key for this door. And so we cannot use it for other isurei hana'ah. And so now we're going to go to the next pasuk. But we're going to come back to this pasuk in a minute. All right, so strategy 2, pasuk 2. Amaleh Rabbi Yonatan Rabach. This was all a conversation between a certain student and Rabbi Shimon bar Nachman, and so Rabbi Shimon bar Nachman is the one that rejected the first one. So then the student says, actually, your own teacher Rabbi Yonatan taught me another derivation. Me'ahai kerad ka'amar la. V'im yivater mi'besan hamiluim u'min alechem ad haboker, she'en tamud omar lo ye'achel, u'ma tamud omar lo ye'achel, v'im eno inyan negufed, ha'ketiv esarafta tanotar ba'esh. תנאו עניין לשאר איסורים שבתורה, ומנו עניין לאכילה, תנאו עניין לאיסור הנאה. Let's look at it in the full pasuk so we can see what it's talking about. So this is from Shemot Kaftet. It's talking about the miluim, the imam miluim, when they first consecrating the priests. And so they have to bring a special a special korban. And so if there's anything left over, you have to consume that sacrifice within a certain amount of time. If there's anything left over, saraftat hanotar ba'esh, the leftover you have to burn with fire. And then lo ya'achel, and don't eat it. And this is redundant in and of itself, because if I'm burning the whole thing, I have to burn it, then obviously I'm not allowed to eat it. So what do I need these words, lo ya'achel? So since they're extra here, so this is a key without a door, and we have a door without a key. That's the fact that some things are prohibited b'hana'ah, like chametz and shor niskal. So you know what? I'm going to take these lo ya'achel and transfer them over to say that they are actually referring to chametz. Okay, very good. So that's his proof. Now, even though we're learning from the words here, right? This lo ya'achel says don't eat them. Now, what am I going to learn about chametz? Don't eat it. I already know I can't eat chametz. The verses say that explicitly. So this is a second directive or a second transfer that not only is it not talking about this context, not even talking about eating. It's actually talking about don't get any benefit from it. So this word does have to mean benefit only because it's redundant if it's talking about eating. Now, if you take the entire phrase, right, burn it and don't eat it, and transfer it over to chametz and shor niskal, then and other items, then that would mean that I have to, anything that I cannot benefit from, I actually have to burn. Now I know chametz have to burn because that has its own pasuk, but we don't assume that regarding other things. Even chametz, you don't actually have to burn it, where we saw the majority opinion says you can get rid of it in lots of other ways. Amar kerav saraftat notar bisrefa ve'en kol isun shebatorah bisrefa. Now here you see that, especially here, puts the word notar between v'sarafta and ba'esh. So this is very specific. It's holding back the burning. The burning is for the local context of the leftover meat. The lo ya'achel, only that we're sending over and saying that's talking about don't benefit from chametz. Okay, so that is the proof from Rabbi Yonatan. But we reject this too. V'hai lo ya'achel lachi hu da'ata. Is it really coming to teach you about Isurei Hana'ah? I need it for the local context. As Rabbi Eleazar taught, Amar Rabbi Eleazar, Lo yachel ki kodeshu. Kol sheba kodesh pasul, ba katuv liten lo ta'aseh al achilato. Rabbi Eleazar taught that this and anything that's holy, any sacrificial meat, any holy meat or holy other things like mincha offering, whatever, that becomes pasul, then I'm not allowed to eat it. And it's adding a specific prohibition on it. I know I said before that, well, since I have to burn it, obviously I can't eat it. Yeah, it's true, it's obvious I can't eat it, but it wouldn't be punishable unless there's a specific negative prohibition. So sarafta ba'esh says is a commandment. You must burn it. What if I do eat it? Then I violate not burning it, but I don't get a punishment for actually eating it if I didn't have these words. So I need lo yachel here to tell me not only that I violate not burning it, I get a punishment specifically if I do eat it. So I need it for the current context. I cannot use these lo yachel as a im eno inyan. Okay, so now Abaye comes to the rescue, hopefully, from the first pasuk. Amar Abaye, le'olam mikra kama. I'm going to go back to the original pasuk that we brought before. Ve'epoch, and I'm going to switch it around, which one I'm leaving here and which one I'm taking transferring to Isurei Hana'ah. Delichto ba'esh tisaref, ve'la ba'e lo te'achel. מה תלמוד לומר לא תאכל, אם אינו עניין לגופו, דנפקא למד רבי אלעזר, תנאו עניין לכל איסורין שבתורה. ואם אינו עניין לאכילה, תנאו עניין לאיסור הנאה. So let's go back to that pasuk, right? This one was talking about sin offerings that are sprinkled inside the Kodesh. That they are not edible. Now we know they have to be burnt. Fine, so burning is good. We have that, right? But how about the lo te'achel? Why do I need to say lo te'achel? This is redundant. Beforehand, Rabbi Yehoshua was saying that ba'esh tisaref is redundant because we have it in these pesukim already. But now we're saying we rejected that. But now we're saying no, that we know lo te'achel is redundant. right? Because if I have to burn it, then obviously I can't eat it. Well, maybe you want a specific prohibition about not eating. I just have that. That's what Rabbi Eleazar just taught me. He learned that from this pasuk, lo ya'achel, that this teaches me that this and any other kodashim that are pasul, I cannot eat. So since I have this, I already have a pasuk that tells me not to eat this sin offering, and so these words lo ta'achel are redundant. You see, this explains the structure. This is why Abayed is not brought second, even though he's talking about the pasuk that we brought first. We bring this pasuk, and then we bring this one from Yomi Natan. And now that we have that principle by which we rejected it, we actually use the rejection of B in order to come back to A by saying lo ta'achel. I know that I cannot eat this already from this pasuk, so this pasuk is extra, and so now I can transfer it over to Yisur Chametz. And even though it's talking about eating, I already know I can't eat chametz, must be talking about something else. So it must be talking about not receiving benefit. And then same thing, or you can also derive that you have to burn anything that I cannot benefit from. That also we're borrowing from B, that B says only notad, and other things like it, kodashim, you have to burn. But anything else, you don't have to burn, you just cannot derive benefit from it. All right, so far so good. Now we resolved all the problems, right? Well, almost. Amar le papa le Abaye, ve'ema li chudele lav legufehu da'ata. De'im de Rabbi Eleazar en lokin alav shebichlалот. So it tells Abaye, no, your proof is not good enough. How do we know that the sin offering itself cannot be eaten? You can't derive it just from the fact that it says to burn it, because that's just a positive commandment. So if I eat it, what am I violate a specific negative? Okay, so you told me I'm going to learn it from this pasuk, lo ya'achel. Fine, but that's a generality, and you don't punish someone for something that I learned from a generality, a general rule, right? This lo ya'achel is talking about all sin offering, all kodashim, all holy meat that becomes pasul, I can't eat. But that is just a general that I'm applying to this specific. So you can't give a punishment for that. I can only punish someone if there is a specific verse that is only to that. And so therefore, in order for there to be a punishment for this kind of hatat, I need these words for their current context. Sorry, they're not extra. No extra key here. You got to keep looking. Okay, finally, Ela amadav papa mehacha v'basar asher yiga bechol tameh lo yachel ba'esh yisaref. Shen tamud omar lo yachel, ma tamud omar lo yachel. Imeno inyan negufo deha nafka mikal v'chomer mimaaser hakal. ומה מעשר הקל? אמרה התורה לא ביערתי ממנו בטמא, בשר קודש חמור לא כל שכן. Okay, let's see the original pasuk in Vayikra 7. So this is now Rav Papa. He's going to learn it from here. It says, any meat that touches something tameh. So now the sacrificial meat becomes tameh. Can't eat it. Lo ya'achel ba'esh yisaref, and you have to burn it. Basar kol tahor yochal basar. We're going to come back to this just as a tangent later on. And as for the meat, if it's holy, if it's pure, then you can eat it. Okay, but right now we're talking about impure meat that became tameh. So we have a double language: don't eat it, and it should be burnt. Now, from the fact that I have to burn it, I would know I can't eat it. But that's only from a positive. I want a specific negative commandment. So lo yachel would tell me that specifically this I cannot eat. So in that sense, I might need it for its context. But here's the thing. Regarding impure food, I already have another pasuk that's talking about impure holy food itself. And that I could learn it from a Kal Vachomer. The Kal Vachomer is from Maaser Sheni in Devarim, at the end of Devarim, right? Maaser Sheni, this is a tenth of my produce that I bring during the first, second, fourth, and fifth year of the Shemitah, and I bring it to Jerusalem, and I can eat it myself. But it has to be in Jerusalem. It has holiness to it. When I do bring it, I have to say a speech. I have to give this little confession, this vidui maaser, and in it we say, Lo bi'arti mimenu betameh. I have not removed it while impure, while I am impure. So you see that we learn that this is something that has a low level of holiness, right? Everyone can eat it just anywhere in Jerusalem, and yet it cannot be consumed when impure. So all the more so, Kodesh, which is much more stringent, obviously that cannot be consumed when it's impure, and this would be a specific it's not a specific prohibition regarding Kodashim, but we're deriving it from a Kal Vachomer, from a specific prohibition. So shouldn't that be good enough? I know what you're thinking. V'chitema en mazirin min hadin. And you're going to say you cannot punish someone, you cannot warn someone. You need a warning and then a punishment. You cannot give a punishable warning just with a din, with a kal vachomer. The reason is, even though we sometimes think of kal vachomer as being very straightforward, right? You know, if I can lift 100 pounds, and certainly I can lift 50 pounds, but sometimes kal vachomer can be kind of tricky and use very subtle details, and sometimes it can be reversed the other way. So since it's based on human reason, and human reason is not always perfect, so therefore we're not going to punish someone. We can learn laws, but we can't learn punishable laws from a kal vachomer. And so you say, sorry, this kal vachomer, not good enough. However, I have something else here. Hekeshahu, it's also hekesh, where I compare two things together. Dichtiv lo tuchal le'echol b'sharecha ma'asar deganecha teroshecha v'yisarecha u'bechorot bekarecha. In Devarim Yud Bet, when it's talking about centralization and saying you can't make korbanot anywhere you want, it mentions in the same pasuk the maaser and bekarecha, so holy, the holiness of maaser and the holiness of sacrifices like the bechor. Since it puts them together, it says these two are equal. So I have more than a kal vachomer, I actually have a kesh also. And therefore that is sufficient. The pasuk in Devarim is sufficient to tell me that something that is holy, I cannot eat when it's tameh. And so, right, therefore, the pasuk back here, lo ye'achel, regarding sacrificial meat that becomes tameh, is extra. Since I don't need it here, this will be the key that I can match up to the door of isureh hana'ah. Okay, good. So matamud omad lo yachel, imenu anyan legufo, teneu anyan lechol yisun shabbat Torah, imenu anyan achila, teneu anyan lahana'ah. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to apply it to chametz and shor niskal, and even though it says lo yachel, I know that I can't eat those. So this is teaching me that I cannot benefit from it. The same exercise now. Over here it says I have to burn this food that became tameh. Do I have to burn anything that is a subhana'ah? That's the one from B, right? We're applying that part of it here again. That specifically notar, other things that are kodesh have to burn, but not anything else. I don't have to burn these. Okay, now a challenge to this source. Wait a second. Why not leave this lo yachel right where it is in this context? And this will tell you that you violate two things, right? Two negative commandments. And if for each one you get 40 lashes, then you'll get 80 lashes. And we find other places where this happens as well. Lav mi amar Abaye, achal putita loke arba. If someone eats this little snail, then they get flogged four sets of floggings. Why? Well, it is a sheketz. It's a creepy, crawly creature, and there are two pasukim, one pasuk that says it twice, and that pasuk that says don't eat those. So that's two right there for any shedetz. And then furthermore, there are two more pasukim that talk about things that are in the water. If it doesn't have fins and scales, doesn't have the signs, then do not eat. So one in Vayikra, one in Devarim. So now we have 4 pasukim that tell me not to eat snails. And I don't say they're redundant. I just add on more punishments. And how about if you eat an ant? That's even worse. If you have a choice between a snail and an ant, go with the snail. Because an ant, you get 5 sets of malkut. How do we get 5? Well, the 2 base ones, that's for any sheretz. And then in addition to that, because it's not a water animal, but a land animal, there are 3 pisukim that say anything on land, any creepy crawly on land is prohibited. 1141, 1142, 1144. So that's there you go, 5 for eating an ant. But that's not even the worst. If you eat a hornet, sir'ah loke shesh. Sir'ah, you get all those 5 that we said before, the 2 base ones for any sheretz, the 3 more for anything on land, even though it flies, it's flies on land, but there's yet another one for flying insects. So that's number 6. So that's where you really want to avoid eating hornets. Okay, so just like here, we have multiple prohibitions, right, to show just how bad this is. So too, regarding the impure meat, we could take this pasuk and say, holy meat that's impure, do not eat it. And I know you can already compare it to maaser sheni, which is also holy, and that if that's tameh, you can't eat it. And so that would be one prohibition. And why do I need this? That should be so. It'd be 2 prohibitions. So why don't you say I need it for its context and use it here, rather than transfer it to somewhere else? The answer to that is another important rule. Kol hecha deika lemidrash darshinan vela mokminan belave yetere. It's as if this is another rule. If we have a choice between using a pasuk to add on another prohibition on something we already know is prohibited, or to derive as a midrash something that we didn't know yet, so we're going to use it for a new prohibition rather than an added second prohibition on something that we already know. All right, and this answer stands, and so we've resolved a whole new strategy for deriving isurei hana'ah. On the way, we learned really a lot of important principles regarding midrash halacha. So this is quite an important sugya, and the truth is these comparisons are very relevant because regarding all the things that just says lo yachel, all those other list of 11 items we had before, it never says explicitly that you can't derive benefit from in those cases. But kodashim, right? All these holy things, these are a good analogy. You can't eat them, you can't derive benefit, you have to burn them. So this actually is a pretty good source if we want to bring a comparison to other things like chametz. All right, very good. Now that I said that, I'm just thinking out loud that chametz we're bringing as part of matzah we're bringing as part of sacrifice. Chametz we have to get rid of because you can't be as part of any sacrifice. So, all right, it's not like the chametz is actually itself like kodashim, but rather from the extraneous pesukim. Okay, good. Now what we're going to do is, because we mentioned this pasuk here regarding basar kol tahor yochal basar, we're going to just explain what this might mean, that as for the flesh, as long as it's pure, you can eat it. What is that talking about? So, dereshe lamali lerabot asim ulbona. Okay, so the beginning of the verse, 7:19, it's actually the end of the verse. I don't know. Why do I need that? Oh, it's coming to include other things like, sorry. Okay, this is what it is. Okay. The word bechol in the beginning of the verse, what is that coming to include? What else can become tameh besides the meat? It's coming to include the firewood and the levonah, the spices, the incense. That even though these are not edible items, if they become tameh, then they can become tameh. Usually things that are not food, right, don't become tameh, but these are susceptible to tumah, even though they're not food, and that's what the word bechol is coming to include. Good. Now the end of the verse. Habasar kotod yochal basar desefe lamali. Why do we need the end of the verse that says it comes to include something that is pure? Lerabot emurin. This comes to include the parts of the sacrifice, the insides that I sacrifice on the mizbeach. They also have, even though they're not usually eaten, they're not quite edible, but they will have the status of something edible, of meat, and therefore they are also susceptible to ritual impurity. Okay, and therefore if someone does eat them when they're impure, then he will get a punishment. Okay, emurin. Mehatam nafka. Hold on. Am I going to learn that from that pasuk in Vayikra? I have another pasuk later in that same perek. The Tanya. V'nefesh asher tochal basan mizebech hashelamim asher laHashem lerabot et ha'emurin. Right. Someone who eats from mizebech hashelamim. Right. Those. And this says it comes to include emurin. And the rest of the pasuk is if he's impure, right, then he gets karet. And so, look, we have a pasuk already that we learned that it comes to include those parts that are not usually in that are sacrificed, that they also have the same, they can receive ritual impurity. So we answer, hatam tumat haguf bekaret, hacha tumat basar belav. We're talking about different situations. The second one is talking about if the person, hanefesh asher tochal basar, if I am impure and I eat it, then it's the punishment is karet. This pasuk is talking about if I am tahor and I eat meat that became tameh, then that's prohibited, and that would only be in lav. And so it's talking about two scenarios, and that's why you need to learn both. There are different levels of severity too. All right, good. Amar Rabbi Abhu, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, Rabbi Abhu, our friend from all the way back, he had the other shita, but now he's going to talk about some other things in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Called Yisurin Shabbat Torah and Lokin Alehen Ela Derech Achilatan. Important principle that we only get a punishment if you eat these prohibited items in the Torah. If you eat them as in a normal way, the way that they're normally eaten. We saw this concept in Shabbat. You only get punished for Shabbat if you light a fire the way it's usually done, not in a different way. Okay, that was specific to laws of Shabbat because of it has to be something that you intend to do. But a similar concept applies here. So what are some examples? What would be an example of unusual eating? Amarav shimi bar ashe lamaute shimachal chelev chay shepatur. You take chelev, that's prohibited fat of the animal, and you eat it raw. Okay, few people eat raw fat. That's an abnormal way of eating. Usually you'll cook it, right? You'll use it for the soup or something, but you don't just swallow a glob of fat. And therefore, if you do, even though it's prohibited, patur, there's no punishment for that. Okay, that's one version of the teaching and the name of Rabbi Abu and the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Ikada amre, another version of that same teaching. Amar Rabbi Abu, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Kol yisun Shabbat Torah en lokin alehen era derech ha'ana'atan. He wasn't talking about eating it in a usual way, but rather benefiting from it also in a usual way. You're not punished if you benefit from something you're not allowed to benefit from if you do it in an abnormal way. Like what? If I have a wound and I need some like Vaseline to smooth over the wound, if I take some fat from an ox that was stoned, this is something I cannot derive benefit from. Now, what do you usually do with fat? They would usually burn it as fuel to make light. It's pretty unusual to use it as for medication. So therefore, if that's the way you use it, then patur. And in this version, we're going to say for sure, we know it's even more abnormal than using fat for medicine, eating fat raw, right? And since that's even more unusual, then for sure that would also be patur. Good. A couple of statements that back up that teaching. Itmar nameh, amar Ravacha bar Avya, amar Rav Aseh, amar Rabbi Yochanan, hiniach chelev shel shor haniskal al gabe makato patur. Lefi shekol yisun shebat Torah en noken alahem ela derech hana'atan. This is the same thing. If you put fat on your that you can or prohibited fat on your makah, not just prohibited, but from shor niskal, which is prohibited from benefit, then patur, because that's not the way people usually use it. Amar Rabbi Zera, afanana metenena en sofgin et arba'in mishum orla. We have here a hint to Chanukah from the word sofgin. Sofgin means to absorb. You don't absorb 40 lashes, but it also comes to the word sefog. The word sufganiyah comes from this word. Sefog is kind of like a spongy cake, sufganiyah, and ironically, the word sefog itself comes from the Greek word sponge. You can even see, right, even in English, you see those letters. So ironically, the the typical Chanukah food in which we celebrate the defeat of the Greeks is actually a Greek word. Okay, but that was just a Daf Yomi current events connection. So Sofgin et arba'im mishum orla. Ela en sofkin ela al hayosim min hazetim min hanavim bilvad. So this Baraita says that you for orla, right, anything that grows in the first 3 years of a tree, you do not get 40 lashes except some juice that comes from olives and grapes. So if you have some olives and grapes and a little juice oozes out and you benefit from them, you use them, then you do get lashes, but only those, not other fruits. If it's from berries or figs or pomegranates and a little juice oozes out and I benefit from some of that juice, no, I don't get a punishment. Why? Perhaps because it's the unusual way. Regarding olives and grapes, the usual way that we use that we derive benefit from it is from their juice, right? They're kind of grown for their juice. Their olive oil and wine is much more valuable than the olives and grapes themselves. But regarding other fruits, in those days, they would eat them, right? They would very rarely squeeze them into juice. And so therefore, benefiting from the juice is an unusual way. And so this would seem to be another proof for the Rabbi Yochanan's law, but we reject this. If you were contrasting the juice with the actual fruit, then I would say, yes, you're right, this would be a good proof. But here we're not talking about the fruit, the juice that comes out, but rather it's just a little moisture, just a little bit that oozes out. And so that little bit is not even considered fruit juice at all. It's considered nothing. Regarding olives and wine, that they're so precious, even that little bit is considered something significant. And so that would be a violation of orla. But regarding other fruit, that moisture that comes out is not considered anything. So it's not because it's an unusual way. It's just not even defined as being part of the fruit at all. All right, good. And so that we'll end here for today. And tomorrow we're going to go on to other things like kilei kedem and very important question of basar bechalav, which, as we know, is a sur b'hana'ah, and we'll discuss that as well. Baruch Adonai l'olam, amen ve'amen.